Looking back now, I've always seen myself as a guy who valued routine, order, and a sense of responsibility. Some might say I was rigid, but I always believed in doing things the right way, avoiding drama whenever possible. I wasn't one for chaos or chasing after thrills. Life, in my mind, worked better when you stuck to the rules, and I figured others should do the same. Maybe that's why it completely blindsided me when my wife acted the way she did. I thought she understood where I stood, and for the most part, I thought we had a good thing going. But it turns out she saw things differently. At first, I was drawn to her energy, the way she could just light up a room. Early in our relationship, that spark was fun, even exciting. But as time went on, it started to wear on me. While I was content with a stable life, she seemed to always be chasing after something new, something thrilling. I didn't think much of it at first. Sure, we were different, but I didn't see it as a bad thing. However, as time went on, it became obvious that her constant search for excitement didn't match my idea of what life should be. For a while, I didn't give it much attention. I had my job, my daily responsibilities, and frankly, I was comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. Meanwhile, she seemed to get more and more restless. Little complaints started slipping into our conversations. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone has bad days, right? But it wasn't just bad days. It became a pattern. Her tone started to change, like nothing was ever good enough for her. It started to wear on me, but I held my tongue. I'm not the type to start fights. What I failed to grasp back then was just how deeply that restlessness had taken root in her. Maybe I was too focused on keeping things smooth, too set on stability. She never directly said she was unhappy, but there were always small hints, comments about how dull life was, how other people seemed to be doing more exciting things. From my perspective, though, we had a pretty good setup. A house, solid jobs, no drama. I couldn't understand what more she wanted. Adventure? That's for people who don't have responsibilities, I thought. Even when things started to shift between us, I didn't pick up on it right away. Looking back, I realize I missed the signs. I had been so intent on keeping everything in balance that I failed to notice the growing distance between us. Or maybe I just didn't want to acknowledge it. I had this image in my head of how life was supposed to be, and I guess I underestimated just how far off that was from what she wanted. And that's where things started to go downhill. Slowly at first, like a thread being pulled from a sweater. You don't notice it until the whole thing unravels. It all started with her constant complaints about her job. She'd come home and talk about how dead the office was, how her coworkers were boring, how the atmosphere was unbearable. I didn't really get it. From what I knew, her coworkers seemed like decent people. They weren't antisocial or rude. They even hung out together after work from time to time. What more could she want? But for her, it was never enough. I don't know if it was just her personality or something deeper, but she always seemed to be chasing something that wasn't there. She'd complain, "They're so predictable. We do the same thing every time and it's so lame." I didn't see the issue. Predictable is safe. Predictable means nobody's messing things up. We didn't even hang out with our own friends every weekend, let alone with coworkers. Work is work, not a social club. You clock in, do your job, and get along with the people around you. That's all you really need, right? But for her, it was like she wanted the office to be some kind of adventure. I remember thinking, what is it that you really want? Why did every week need to feel like some sort of event? I was fine with things as they were. Every now and then, her office would have a small gathering or a night out, and that seemed like enough to me. Quality over quantity. But she needed something else, like the regular pace of life was suffocating her. After a while, I got tired of hearing about it. Every week, it was the same story. They're boring, or I can't stand how lifeless it feels. It wasn't just venting anymore. It was a constant thing. Eventually, I started to tune it out because I didn't see what the big deal was. I thought to myself, you've got a good job, you're getting paid, and nobody's treating you badly. So what if your coworkers aren't dancing on tables every Friday night? It started to dawn on me that maybe the problem wasn't her job at all. Maybe it was her. As her complaints grew more frequent, it started to wear on me. But still, I kept quiet, thinking it was just a phase. Maybe she'd get over it. I was wrong. What I didn't realize at the time was that her frustration wasn't just about the office or her coworkers. It was something bigger. Something that had to do with her feeling trapped in a routine that didn't suit her anymore. I remember the first time she tried to change things at work. She told me she wanted to liven up the atmosphere, make it more fun. She talked about organizing some kind of party or event to get her coworkers more engaged. Honestly, I didn't see the point, but she seemed excited, so I didn't stop her. I figured maybe if she threw a party or two, she'd get it out of her system, and things would go back to normal. The first event went pretty well from what she told me. She came home, a bit more cheerful, saying that people had fun. But there was this edge in her voice, a hint of disappointment that lingered beneath the surface. When I asked her if things had improved at work, she'd shrug and say, "Yeah, but," there was always a but. It wasn't enough that people showed up. She wanted more. She needed everyone to be just as excited as she was, to feel something bigger. She kept saying that her coworkers were still too stiff, too boring. So, she tried again. Another event. This time, she planned something bigger, more creative. I remember her running her ideas by me as if I cared about office parties. She was talking about theme nights and all these activities, trying to make it more fun. I just nodded along. I didn't understand why she was putting so much effort into it. Work is work, after all. I didn't see the point of turning it into some kind of social experiment. After the second event, she came home looking even more frustrated. People had shown up, they'd had a good time, but she still wasn't satisfied. "They just don't know how to let loose," she complained. I didn't get what she was expecting. These were her coworkers, not her closest friends. She was hoping they'd be something they weren't, and when they didn't meet her expectations, it was starting to wear her down. I could see it, her disappointment, growing each time she talked about work. It wasn't just an office full of boring people anymore. It became something bigger, something that affected how she saw everything, including me. It wasn't long before the frustration she felt at work spilled over into our relationship. I still didn't say much though. I thought it was just a phase, something she'd get over eventually. But I was wrong again. This wasn't something she was going to get over. Eventually, she stopped trying. She gave up on organizing events and stopped putting in the effort to liven up the office. It wasn't worth it to her anymore. She had tried twice, and both times, something had been missing. Something she couldn't quite figure out. After that, the complaints didn't stop, they only got worse. The frustration turned into resentment, and I could feel it between us every day. Then one night she came home, and something was different. There was a look on her face, not the usual frustration but something else. She didn't say anything right away, and I didn't push. I figured it was just another bad day, but the way she carried herself that evening, it felt off. There was something in the air, something I couldn't put my finger on. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. And then it happened. Whatever it was, it changed everything between us. It wasn't something she told me directly, but I could feel it in the way she spoke, in her body language. She was different, and I didn't understand why at first. But it didn't take long before I found out. A few weeks later, she started talking about a new guy at her office. At first, it seemed like no big deal. She said he was a breath of fresh air, someone who shook things up the moment he walked in. "Why is it so dead in here?" he'd apparently asked on his first day. She described him as the type of guy who instantly grabs everyone's attention, full of charisma, always in the spotlight. The kind of person who thrives on energy and excitement. I could tell by the way she talked about him that she was impressed. Maybe even a little too impressed, if you ask me. She went on and on about how he was different from the rest of her coworkers. "He's full of life," she'd say. "He just gets it. He knows how to make things fun." Something didn't sit right with me. I didn't like how much she was talking about him, but I kept quiet, figuring I shouldn't jump to conclusions. He was just a new guy at the office, right? No big deal. But as time went on, she couldn't stop mentioning him. Finally, "Someone who understands," she'd say, almost too enthusiastically. That's when my gut started to tell me something was off. I asked her if this guy was really all that or if he was just another smooth talker who knew how to charm his way into people's good graces. She laughed it off, telling me, "Come on, it's not like that. He's just trying to make work more fun." But I wasn't convinced. I've been around long enough to recognize the type. Guys like him roll in with all their charm and confidence, and before you know it, they're making moves where they shouldn't. Still, I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I told myself maybe I was just being paranoid, overreacting. After all, nothing had actually happened yet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy was going to be trouble. After this new guy showed up, things with my wife started changing. It wasn't just her venting about work anymore. She was glued to her phone all the time, constantly texting or organizing something. At first, I thought it was just work-related stuff, her trying to be a better team player or whatever. But it quickly became obvious that this was more than just work. She'd sit there, phone in hand, texting away, like she was handling some big operation. I asked her about it a few times. "What's going on with you? You've been on your phone nonstop." She brushed it off, saying she was just coordinating some office events. But I could see there was more to it than that. She had this new energy, this drive that hadn't been there before. It was like she'd become a completely different person, almost like work had turned into her personal mission. One night I asked her again, more directly this time, "What's going on with you? You've changed?" She smiled and told me she was just happy that things at work were finally fun. "We're actually doing stuff now, planning things, meeting up more. It's not boring anymore." That word again, boring. It was like she couldn't stand the idea of anything being mundane. She started talking about all these gatherings they were having outside of work. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured they were just normal office meetups. But she made it sound like more than that, like they were becoming close friends. Then one day, she mentioned they were planning a big office party. "It's going to be huge," she said, her excitement spilling over. When I asked her what kind of party it was, she shrugged and said, "Just something fun, a way to celebrate all the hard work we've been doing." I didn't push her on it, but I found it strange how vague she was being. Normally, she'd go into all the details, but this time she didn't. I asked if the new guy had anything to do with it, and she laughed, "Of course. He's the one organizing it. Without him, none of this would have happened." That didn't make me feel any better. This guy had only been at her office for a few months, and already he was the one pulling the strings? The more I thought about it, the less I liked the idea of this party. Something didn't feel right. I asked her again, "What exactly is this party? What's going to happen?" She just smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's going to be fun. It's good for the office, a way for everyone to relax." But she was being too dismissive about it. It was clear she didn't want me knowing the full story. I didn't press her further, but my gut told me something was off. Then, late one evening, I got a phone call. It was one of her coworkers, a guy I barely knew. His voice sounded tense, almost urgent. "Hey man, I don't know how to say this, but something's up at the party. You need to see something." My stomach dropped. I asked him what he was talking about, and he said, "I've got your wife's phone. I'm going to send you a couple of pictures. You need to see them for yourself." A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. 2 photos came through. I stared at them in disbelief. There she was, my wife, kneeling in front of some guy dressed as a cop. A stripper. It took me a moment to even process what I was seeing, but when it hit me, it felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. This wasn't just some harmless work event. This was real, and the second photo confirmed everything. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my jacket and was out the door before I could even think. I was fuming, anger boiling up inside me. I had to see it for myself. I had to confront her. This wasn't something I could ignore. By the time I got to the office where the party was happening, I could hear music and laughter spilling out into the hallway. None of it registered with me. I was focused on one thing, finding my wife. I stormed into the party, scanning the room, and then I saw them. My wife and that guy, tangled together in the corner like they didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't just flirting, they were deep into it, in front of everyone. Something inside me snapped. I charged across the room, shoving people out of my way. Without saying a word, I grabbed the guy by the neck and yanked him off her. I swung my fist into his face as hard as I could, and the sound of the impact was satisfying. Blood poured from his nose as he stumbled back, dazed. I didn't even look at him again. He wasn't my focus. I turned to my wife, who was half naked, staring up at me in shock. She didn't try to explain herself or offer any excuses. She knew she was caught. Without a word, I grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the room, dragging her through the hallways, not caring that she was exposed or that people were watching. I didn't care about anything except getting her out of there. We got to the car, and I drove in silence, anger still surging through me. When we finally pulled up to the house, I turned to her and asked, "What the hell was that? What the hell are you thinking? Do you even understand what you've done?" She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she just shrugged and said, "I don't know. I just needed something different. Life's been boring, and I wanted to feel something." "Boring? You did this because you were bored." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You threw everything away for what? A little excitement? She didn't have a good answer. She didn't even try to justify it. She just sat there, emotionless, like none of this mattered. And that's when I knew there was no saving this. Whatever we had was over. The next morning, I packed her things. I didn't want to look at her, didn't want to hear her voice. I just needed her gone. She tried to talk to me, begging for another chance, but I wasn't interested. She made her choice, and there was no coming back from that. After she left, I called her mom, told her everything. "Your daughter just cheated on me at some sleazy party," I said bluntly. Her mom was in shock, speechless at first, but I didn't stick around for the conversation. I didn't care anymore. The divorce process was brutal, but I was done. I moved into a small apartment and started to rebuild my life. It was hard at first, but eventually I felt lighter, like I was finally free from the weight of it all. I focused on work, reconnected with friends, and started to live for myself again. Months passed, and I heard through the grapevine that my ex-wife was struggling. She had moved back in with her parents, trying to piece her life back together. But I wasn't concerned with her anymore. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to waste any more time looking back. In the end, I realized that the betrayal, as painful as it was, set me on a path to rediscovery. I learned what I wouldn't tolerate in a relationship and what I needed to be truly happy. It was a hard lesson, but one I'm grateful for now. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video, because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.